Hello, it's Silver, and this is Philna Fantasy. That's what it's called. This is a top-down action-adventure, technically an action RPG, but with kind of moderate RPG elements, and more focused on puzzle-solving and questing. You could say it's somewhat in the vein of games like the Mana series, or maybe like Terranigma and its related games, but you could also go a bit forward and compare it to things like Crosscode. By the way, Crosscode is an amazing game, please go play it. It's an experience that mixes several influences and seems to be going for a kind of average of them all. It does lay down a pretty direct gameplay loop for you early on. Accept quests, crawl a dungeon, solve puzzles, beat a boss, go home, check out all your loot, maybe craft some things, and turn in your quests. It's a pretty simple formula, and I don't personally see anything wrong with that as long as the loop itself is competently delivered. This isn't a game that's gonna wow with fresh ideas or new mechanics, but it is a pretty satisfying adventure with some flaws along the way. This game goes for a pretty classic look that does everything well, but nothing spectacularly. It's quite colorful and nice to look at. I approve of the way structures and ruins look. Ruins have a nice atmosphere, and things like buildings in town are cozy. Outdoor areas are also pretty nice, but they have a tendency to feel hemmed in and somewhat claustrophobic. I imagine that this is deliberate, as the theming of these areas seems to want you to feel that everything off the path that you're on is dark and unknown. Since the game mostly consists of dungeon crawling, it's necessary that the dungeon areas be good-looking and nicely varied. Although I haven't seen a dungeon I thought was especially creative, I do think they look nice, as mostly a smattering of fantasy RPG classics. I do think the background work adds something, and the details on certain areas are nice touches, like the way the water slowly stops flowing out of the grates on the wall when you close the valves in the sewer dungeon. Character and enemy sprites are pretty well done. They're somewhat large for how those kinds of things often look in this perspective. Enemies in particular have a nice bit of personality to them, which is good because recognizing them quickly is useful due to the fact that some enemies are way more dangerous than others. The boss sprites seem to be where a lot of love went. They actually look pretty great and are easily the best aspect of the sprite work for me. They've got patterns to learn, of course, so it's nice that they're detailed enough to see their wind-ups and tells and stuff. Bosses can deal a lot of damage fast, so these sorts of things matter a lot in gameplay as well as just visually. Musically, it's a lot like the visuals, enjoyable but not amazing. I think the music is nice background adventuring music for the most part. It does manage to create some atmosphere in the dungeons, and the boss music is fittingly higher intensity. Basically, it's fine music for this type of game, but it won't blow your socks off, and you'll be unlikely to have a favorite standout track. Not the sort of thing I'd listen to outside of the game, but in the context of this adventure, it does its job. So in terms of the audio-visual presentation, this game averages out to be, average. It's the kind of thing that's generally fine, inoffensive and utilitarian, but without major glaring flaws either. Kinda like a cheese pizza. It's acceptable, but it isn't going to surprise you with exotic flavors. The main issue I foresee with this isn't that there's much wrong with the visual style, it's that it kind of places a heavier focus on the gameplay to do the heavy lifting to generate the interest and uniqueness that the visuals can't. If the gameplay starts to feel average too, that's when average becomes an actual issue. If too many things average out to be only acceptable, then it starts to feel like the game is missing a big selling point or a reason to notice it above others in the genre. So then let's talk gameplay. There are several systems all working together here to provide that light RPG foundation that a dungeon crawler is often built off of. It is class-based, so you start off by choosing one of 4 different classes. There's a Berserker, a Ranger, an Assassin, and a Chronomage. I'm playing the Chronomage, and I discovered its name is not particularly accurate. It has a couple of skills that relate to time manipulation, but the vast majority are elemental magic spells and have nothing to do with chronoing. Each class has a pretty sizable skill tree and specific types of weapon that it can use. The skill tree is a huge source of power progression for your character. There are plenty of active skills you can learn. You can slot up to 4 of them at once. There are also loads of passives, some that improve specific active skills and others that are more about your character as a whole. Many nodes on the tree can also be purchased multiple times to improve what they do. This is especially true for actives, but there are still some that only need to be bought once. The tree progresses by points spent, so spending a certain number of points will unlock the next row all the way up to the top eventually. You can also respec whenever you like, which is pretty great. Big fan of that. It doesn't seem to cost anything either. You earn a skill point per level to spend, but there are also the very rare and valuable skill books that give you 1 point when you read them as well. Most of what your build is capable of comes from putting these points where you want them, so I do appreciate how different the classes are and how much stuff there is in each tree to try out. The other big thing you're looking to get to progress is loot. You'll find quite a bit of it, although you do have limited bag space. It can be expanded later, at least. Loot works in a tier system. There's a Roman numeral in the corner of all gear that tells you what tier it is. You can both drop and find gear from enemies in chests, as well as craft it yourself from materials. Each class can only use their class weapons, but armor seems to be fair game for everyone. You can equip whatever you find. There are also accessories to find, like rings and amulets. There is a classic Diablo-style color-based rarity system, and higher rarities simply have better base stats for that item type, as well as adding various affixes of differing quality to them. Gear can drop in any rarity, but when it comes to crafting, you have to craft a certain item repeatedly, and at certain thresholds it'll permanently up the rarity that you craft of that item. There are also some almost Path of Exile-like item manipulation thingies that can do stuff like re-roll affixes on a given item. Items can also have sockets for gems. You can use a punch to add an additional socket to something if you'd like. The gems are slot specific, so a gem that can be placed in a weapon cannot be placed in a necklace, for instance. The tier system is very rigid here. I think honestly so much so that it becomes a bit of a detriment. Higher tiers of equipment are only found in specific areas. If a zone drops tier 2 gear, then that whole zone will only drop tier 2 gear. This means that there isn't really much tier mobility. If you want to drop higher stuff, then you gotta advance, even if your current stuff is a lower tier and makes everything take forever to kill. This means there will always be some zones ahead of your progression that get really tedious to clear out, but you have to if you want the equipment that's appropriate to that area in the first place. Kind of a catch-22. Crafting is the same. Every tier has a list of materials that only drop in certain zones of that tier. If you want to make tier 2 weapons, then you'll need blue crystals, for instance. Blue crystals can only be found in areas where you'll need tier 2 weapons to be competitive. Now, the word tier has lost all meaning, you're welcome. All this is to say progression is very inorganic and like climbing a cliff face with big squares cut out of it to slow you down. It's a constant stop-start where you'll have to advance to an area that's a bit too hard for you, grind it for stuff to make it more tolerable, then keep advancing until you hit an even higher tier zone and repeat. The cherry on top that makes this all a bigger problem than it otherwise could be is that the stats from gear gets massively higher per tier. The difference between steps is huge. A high rarity tier 1 spellbook will have 17 damage, but a rust rarity, that's the lowest, tier 2 spellbook will have 51. Armor works much the same, with armor 1 tier up having drastically better protection and extra stats. Higher rarities will also compound this with the effects of the affixes that they add. Enemies in this game are way too spongy and often take forever to kill, so if you have the wrong tier weapon, they take so long it's kind of insulting sometimes. They'll also start to do much more damage suddenly because enemies inorganically and suddenly get much stronger in big steps as you cross the tiers and dungeons. Bosses are the worst culprit though. They have great visual designs and fun attacks to learn, as well as multiple phases. They'd be quite fun to fight if they didn't have such an insane amount of health that even weapons of the correct tier feels like you're felling a tree with a weed whacker. They also often do so much damage that even having one lower tier or rarity piece of armor can see them carving half your health with every strike. Basically, zones are tedious until you get geared up. Then the boss is one big gear check for everything you've got. That'll take forever no matter what. After that, you'll be off to the next zone where the cycle usually starts over. I admit I'm not a huge fan of this ultra-rigid, super artificial feeling tier system that feels like trying to climb a staircase 6 steps at a time. There are at least some other methods of progression that are pretty neat. For one, as you explore dungeons, you'll sometimes get new powers, such as the ability to grow plants on the spot. These act as something like the tools in a Zelda game, being used quite a bit in the dungeons that you got them, and then in every dungeon after that. Then they'll be used on the boss of that dungeon in some way to cap off your knowledge of the skill. It's a fun idea, and I like the uses of the skills that you get. There's also the magic belt you have that adds a cool collection element to monster slaying. This belt has a catalog of cards in it based off of each monster you can find in the world. Every monster can drop a material unique to them. This material is not for crafting and doesn't go in your inventory. Instead, when you collect a certain threshold of the material, you can unlock their card. Further materials will slowly improve the card with new effects. You have various slots where you can put these cards to activate their effects. New slots are unlocked as you get more total monsters unlocked. Each card also has a heat value, and the belt only has a certain heat capacity, so there's like a limiter of what you can equip at once. There are also other relics you'll find that add other functions, which is pretty cool. Combat is simple but enjoyable. You have a basic attack for your weapon type, and you can mix in your active skills to try to wrap things up effectively. Each class has a mana-like resource they use to fuel their skills that tends to regen quite quickly, but skills also have a cooldown, so things don't usually get too spammy all the time. You'll also come across enemies with a gold health gauge. By the way, these guys are elites and have new attacks compared to their lesser brethren, and of course they also have drastically increased health. They do tend to have powerful cards to unlock though, and they start to get peppered into encounters about halfway through a given dungeon. Dungeons have a lot of puzzles in them. I'd say the ratio of puzzle to combat is fairly even. Some of the puzzles can actually get a bit hard later on as well. They added an I give up button to the large puzzles that block main dungeon progress. That way, if you aren't much of a puzzle person, you can just skip them and still progress. Although this won't allow you to get any of the items or chests in the puzzle area itself. These skips don't usually show up for the side puzzles either. Some even take place across multiple rooms. These side puzzles can be tricky, but they often have several chests for sick loot, and some allow you to get to expanded areas aside from the main path. If you encounter a particularly tricky side puzzle, it likely has a skill book as a reward, which is well worth getting if you can. So this game is definitely pretty puzzle heavy. I personally enjoy that sort of thing because I'm a strange and hopeless individual, but I think it's good to warn people that the number and density of puzzles is quite high, just in case those throw them off. You have a safe hub town you can teleport to and from at any time. You are automatically healed when you step in, and there are several things you can do here. You'll get new quests at the main counter, as well as turn them in there when you're done. Both main and side quests are accepted here. Then you've got some shops, one for gear, another for consumables. You'll have a lot of money, so this is one way to spend it. There's also a bank, which is very important since you have limited space. Plopping loot in the bank is a good idea. You can also craft from the bank, thankfully, so you can just offload all your crafting mats and you're good to go. The second floor has all the crafting stations. There are stations for basically every kind of item here. As you make stuff, you'll raise your crafting level of that discipline, which will give you nice passive benefits at certain levels and unlock new recipes. This is where you'll notice that every tier of item has specific materials and doesn't tend to use any others outside of that. So how much of the recipe list you can try out is entirely gated by what dungeons you've been to. I mentioned that crafting an item multiple times will up the rarity you can make, so grinding mats is often a good idea. This is also one of the only ways to get the gems that you socket into items. Making them takes a couple of steps, but the rewards are good. You can restore a museum as well, which is pretty cool. As you explore, you'll often be finding pieces of paintings that look like puzzle pieces and various artifacts. You can donate these to the curator and they'll be displayed in the museum. You do get some rewards when you donate enough. There's also a pet system. You can buy and get pets that fly around and help you out a little while being adorable. There's a gacha machine in the pet tent that lets you use these coins you find or donate your kidney for to spin it. It'll give you accessories that you can equip to your pets, and they often have slight stats on them, so they aren't entirely cosmetic. You can also feed them. They eat the same food that you do, and each pet has a specific favorite. Feeding them enough will up their star rating and improve them a bit, all the way up to 5 stars eventually. That's basically everything. There are some other little bits and bobs here and there, but that mostly sums up the loop. It's a pretty simple game, but with some extra bits along the way to give it some more flavor. The question is basically okay good enough? There are some cool puzzles and dungeon designs, but much of the combat and progression can be a bit tedious at times. When you combine that with very average audiovisual presentation, you end up with a game that doesn't really do anything glaringly badly, but also doesn't really have a personality or selling point beyond, hey, this is alright. The translation to English is stiff, but perfectly understandable. I have run into a few untranslated lines in Chinese, but there have only been like 2 or 3 of those that I've seen across the whole game. One big sticking point for me are the story and characters, in that it barely has any. I couldn't really tell you who the villain is 8 hours in, or why I'm crawling these dungeons in the first place, really. There aren't standard story beats that explain things. There are some dialogue moments after bosses that advance things, but their dialogue is very generic and doesn't say much. NPCs have no personality at all. Basically, no NPC feels like an actual character. Most simply repeat one line, and the few that talk to you more rarely have anything of interest to say that might develop them or give them like a story to follow, some sort of narrative, a side narrative or something. Side quests are a big missed opportunity here, actually, as they are the standard generic kill X thing or find 5 of X thing sort. Any chance for them to be specific to a certain NPC and give them a plot line to follow or some side narrative to enjoy is gone as soon as you realize that you'll basically never interact with most NPCs. And these quests have nothing to do with any of them, really. I'm trying to be nice to the game's higher points, but when everything surrounding those peaks is a featureless gray wasteland, and then you see you're combining that with a highly generic narrative and no real characters, it gets hard to see this as anything other than just highly average. If average is what you're looking for, you could certainly do worse than this. The game is only $15, so at least the price doesn't make your eyes water or anything. I'd say if you really like action RPGs and have played most of them on Steam, there is still some fun to be had here beneath the highly generic shell it occupies and the tedium that sometimes holds it together. Really, average can be okay as long as you set your expectations accordingly. Otherwise, I might skip this one at the moment. I'll put the Steam link down below just in case you may want to check it out. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.